Welcome. Welcome to our fourth webinar from the U.S. Dairy Export Council. For those of you who do not know me, I'm Carolina Nascimento, and I'm a partner of River Global Consulting Company. River Global represents U.S. Dairy Export Council in South America. U.S. Dairy Export Council is an U.S. group that represents the dairy industry from the United States. As part of our work, besides promoting international businesses, we also provide technical support, particularly when it comes to developing formulations, global activities. So these webinars are serving the purpose of keeping in touch and also providing you education and support. So let's talk about our fourth webinar. So today we're going to talk about dairy ingredients for health nutrition to all age groups. We all know how important this is. Anybody working in this field, we all know how proteins particularly are important for our nutrition, not only for sports nutrition. So today we're going to talk about the importance of proteins for all age groups and not only for sports fans. So I'd like to welcome all of you and our speakers. So let me start. So good morning, Terry Rexroth. She is from the U.S. Dairy Export Council. So Terry has been working hard with us. Terry, good morning.
Good morning, Carolina. Good morning, everyone. Thank you for joining.
E agora eu gostaria de dar bom dia, as boas-vindas.
Now I'd like to welcome and greet Matthew Pikoski. Matthew is the Vice President of Nutrition Research at the National Dairy Council. Good morning.
Good morning. Good morning, everyone. Looking forward to speaking with you all today.
Great. Ok. Então, dando seguimento
Great.
ao nosso webinar,
So now I believe that you are already used to how we start our webinar. So we have a whole question. So we want to understand if you or your company, if you are already promoting the benefits of consuming proteins and other dairy ingredients, and if so, to whom? So what type of consumers? And here we have the bodybuilders or athletes, the elderly, people who want to just control their weight, children, or other groups.
Maravilha, mais alguns segundos para que todos participem.
Just a couple of seconds more. So once again, bodybuilders, the elderly, those who want to lose weight, children, other groups. So, okay, thank you so much for all of you. Now I'm going to share the results. Obviously, we have some of you targeting bodybuilder, athletes, elderly, those who want to lose weight or control a weight, actually weight management, children, and others. So we see there is a lot of interest. So thank you so much for your participation. So now, before we actually start, some pieces of information. So we will have a 70-minute presentation. So I am sure you are all going to enjoy Matthew's presentation. And as usual, we will send you the links so that you can have the presentations as well as the link for this presentation. So our target today is to have a 90-minute webinar. And please do send us your questions using the Q&A icon here at Zoom. So I wish you all a very fruitful event. So let's start.
Hi, everyone. Welcome to all of our listeners, and thank you for joining the next U.S. Dairy Ingredient Spotlight webinar in our 2020 series. My name is Terry Rexroad, and I work in global marketing for the U.S. Dairy Export Council. We're pleased to offer today's webinar, U.S. Dairy Ingredients for Healthy Nutrition at All Ages. During the webinar, please enter your questions in the box available on your screen, and at the end, we will host a Q&A session. We will answer as many questions as possible, time permitting, and all unanswered questions will be addressed by email after the webinar. First, a little about USDEC for those who may not be familiar with us. We are a nonprofit membership organization working on behalf of U.S. dairy farmers. Since USDEC was founded in 1995, U.S. dairy exports have increased sevenfold to nearly $5.6 billion annually. In 2019, the U.S. dairy industry exported the equivalent of nearly 16% of U.S. milk solids. We have offices located in export markets around the world, across Asia, the Middle East, and Latin America. Our global team is focused on building demand for U.S. dairy ingredients and cheese. And now I'd like to welcome our speaker, Matthew Pekoski, Vice President of Nutrition Research for the National Dairy Council. In this role, Matt leads the Dairy Protein Research Program to build scientific evidence supporting benefits of milk and dairy protein ingredients. Today, Matt will review the nutrient profiles of dairy ingredients, especially dairy proteins, and explain why choosing milk and dairy ingredients helps provide critical nutrition during all life stages. Welcome, Matt.
Hello, everyone. My name is Matthew Pekoski, and I'm currently the Vice President of Nutrition Research at the National Dairy Council. I'm happy to have the opportunity today to present to you on the nutrition and health value of U.S. dairy ingredients across a lifespan. While my presentation is going to be focused on dairy ingredients, I wanted to begin by providing a very high-level overview of the nutrition and health value of our core dairy foods, milk, cheese, and yogurt, from which all dairy ingredients are derived. Dairy foods are valuable components of a healthy, balanced dietary pattern for three primary reasons. First, they provide a significant number of essential nutrients in the diet, helping people of all ages meet their nutrient needs. Second, they're particularly noted for the essential role they play in supporting the growth and development of young children. In fact, a recent consensus statement on healthy beverage consumption in early childhood from 5 leading health professional organizations in the U.S. named milk and water as the 2 go-to beverages for children aged 1 to 5 years. And third, the preponderance of scientific evidence has shown that the consumption of dairy foods, including the spectrum from whole fat to fat-free versions, have either neutral or beneficial associations with reduced risk for cardiovascular disease, type 2 diabetes, and high blood pressure in adults. Now, this science-based value of dairy foods is recognized by a majority of food-based dietary guidelines around the world. While there is some diversity or variability regarding specific recommendations from country to country, there are a few core themes that exist. First, they're recognized as foundational to healthy diets. Second, they're typically recommended daily in most countries. Third, they're considered nutrient-rich and frequently noted in particular for the nutrients protein, calcium, and vitamin D. And lastly, while the science is currently evolving regarding the impact of dairy fat and whole-fat dairy foods on health, they're typically recommended in their low-fat and fat-free versions across these food-based dietary guidelines. Now, wanted to take a bit of a transition and a bit of a deeper dive into one of the nutrients that I highlighted on previous slides, and that's protein. And you know, what we've seen across the literature and in a general consensus, and in particular when it comes to the sports and exercise and physical activity area, is that dairy proteins are recognized as being amongst the highest quality proteins available. And really that brings a an important value when it comes to supporting muscle health. And again, I've pulled a couple of quotes here that are from two different position stands. The first that you see at the top, a joint position stand from the Academy of Nutrition and Dietetics, Dietitians of Canada, and the American College of Sports Medicine. That was published in 2016, and you can see the quote: "To date, dairy proteins seem to be superior to other tested proteins, largely due to its leucine content and the digestion and absorption kinetics and branched chain amino acids in fluid-based dairy foods." And a similar recommendation there, I won't take the time to read it verbatim, but you can see that there from the International Society of Sport Nutrition. And on the left, you could see these are US-based products, but there are products, milk-based products, dairy products on the market that are either targeted to that health and wellness, sports and exercise demographic, or more general population. They call out the fact that dairy proteins are complete proteins and that they're high quality proteins. And this is something that is recognized in the scientific literature and is becoming more recognized in a variety of consumer segments. So now what I'd like to do for the remainder of my presentation today is take a bit of a deeper dive on protein, talk about why it's important, talk about why protein quality in particular is important, and then examine some of the literature that has compared different proteins to really illustrate the value of protein quality, again, in particular when it comes to muscle health. So, some of you may be already familiar with this, but I feel like it's important to kind of start with a general grounding of the foundation of some basics of protein nutrition science. And one of them is that, protein is an essential nutrient required by our body every day. We have a daily requirement for a specific amount of protein, and it needs to be provided to all of us throughout all of our life stages every single day. And there's a number of reasons why that protein is essential. And some of those are listed here. And essentially, it really serves as kind of that structural component, those building blocks for our body systems. Many are familiar with the value from a muscle standpoint. Here I've noted strong musculoskeletal system. And that's because it's not only essential to developing and building and maintaining strong muscles, but similar benefits when it comes to bone health. So calcium is not the only nutrient required for bone health. Protein is also essential nutrient when it comes to bone health. In addition, some of the lesser, recognized value that protein provides, dietary proteins provide in terms of our physiology from a day-to-day, and those are, transporting oxygen to muscles. That's hemoglobin. Hemoglobin's a protein that does and serves that function in the body. Here I've noted metabolism of other nutrients. That's done via enzymes. Enzymes are proteins. Again, and you need a certain amount of protein in your diet so that you could have enzymes and hemoglobin. And then here, healthy immune function, immune proteins such as antibodies. Those are proteins. And again, if you are deficient in the protein content in your diet, these different proteins in the body are not going to function optimally, and your health is going to be compromised. The next foundational piece of science from a protein nutrition standpoint is that now proteins are made of individual amino acids, and often it's thought of kind of a strand of pearls. And each individual pearl is an amino acid, and when you join all those pearls together in a strand, it makes a necklace, and that necklace can be considered a protein. And overall, there are 20 amino acids that are needed for the body to make protein. But within those 20, there are really 9 where we focus on from a research perspective mainly, and from a dietary perspective. And those are the 9 essential amino acids, and they're considered essential because our body cannot make those amino acids. The non-essential amino acids, our body has the ability to make those, but those 9 essential need to be provided by the diet exclusively. And those essential amino acids and subgroups of the essential amino acids, the branched chains specifically, which are isoleucine, leucine, and valine, and then in particular leucine as one of those 3 branched chain amino acids, These collectively have a very important role when it comes to stimulating and supporting muscle protein synthesis and muscle health. And lastly, I want to note here, you can see down in red at the bottom of the slide, we know that insufficient intake of essential amino acids will really compromise the ability of tissue, whether it's muscle tissue, whether it's vital organs, to be repaired, to grow, and or maintain not only their mass, but also their function. The next important point I want to illustrate is that, really not all proteins are created equal. They're not all equal in their ability to provide the nutritional value that's needed to support these various physiologic functions. And protein quality can be defined as the ability of a food protein to meet the body's metabolic demand for amino acids and nitrogen. And again, that metabolic demand, what might those be? Well, those are illustrated on that 2 slides ago where I highlighted, whether it was musculoskeletal health, whether it was normal immune function, whether it was transporting oxygen to all the tissues in our body that need oxygen for normal metabolism. Again, the ability of different proteins in our diet to provide the amino acids and the quality of the proteins that are needed to serve these functions are different depending on the food source of that protein. And food proteins vary in their quality based on 3 key factors. The first being amino acid composition, and generally speaking, proteins that have a higher concentration of essential amino acids, those that provide all the essential amino acids in sufficient quantities needed by the body, are considered higher quality proteins. In addition, the digestibility of those proteins and then the bioavailability of those digested amino acids are the second and third factors which contribute to protein quality. And the other point you could see here that I want to make is that there are differences in digestibility, and generally animal proteins are much more highly digestible in compared to plant proteins, and there are a variety of factors that may be contributing to that. Now, certainly the food matrix from which these proteins and amino acids are delivered impact the digestibility of that protein. And not only is it the fat and carbohydrate that are coming with the protein in the food that are impacting that digestibility, but most importantly, there's presence of certain anti-nutritional factors that really limit the digestibility. And we know from protein testing and the scoring of different food sources of protein is that there are higher concentrations of these anti-nutritional factors in plant foods. And that, again, limits the digestibility, decreases the quality. Now, there are a variety of ways, I should say, in which protein quality is scored. The first method that I want to mention is the PDCAS, or the Protein Digestibility Corrected Amino Acid Score. That currently serves as the gold standard for assessing protein quality and is recognized by international bodies such as FAO and various regulatory bodies such as the Food and Drug Administration in the US. The kind of more novel, I should say, or emerging methodology that has been recognized as actually more accurate when it comes to protein quality assessment and is currently being examined in the literature, and work is being done to score a variety of protein foods using this new, more recent, more advanced method that was recognized and recommended by a panel of experts convened by FAO a few years ago, is the Digestible Indispensable Amino Acid Score, or DIAS score. And here on the left, you could see, and compare the PDCAS and DIAS scores for a variety of protein ingredients as well as whole foods. And what you could generally see, whether we're looking at the ingredient forms of food or the whole foods themselves, that dairy, in fact, is able to have the highest score and essentially the highest quality protein available, whether it's whole milk in comparison to other food sources, or whether it's the dairy protein ingredients such as milk protein concentrate and whey protein isolate. And in its general sense, to kind of boil this down and summarize it, is that proteins that have a lower quality score you essentially need to eat or consume more of those proteins to provide the same nutritional value. So, if I look at rice protein concentrate and I look at and compare that to milk protein concentrate, and I'm solely going to look at the PDCAAS value for this example, theoretical example. To get the same protein nutritional value in rice protein concentrate that you would get from a milk protein concentrate, you need to eat, just under 60% more, 58% more rice protein concentrate would be needed. And that's because of those three factors, right? Whether there are some deficiencies or limitations in either its amino acid composition, its digestibility, or lastly, the bioavailability of those amino acids. Now, I wanted to show this example. This is a US-based example, admittedly, but what are the real-world examples or implications of protein quality? And I noted on that previous slide, that last point that I wanted to make that I think is critical, in that lower quality proteins, you need to consume more of them to provide the same nutrition. So that protein quality score should be considered when you're thinking about the nutritional value of different food sources of protein. And in fact, the Food and Drug Administration within the US mandates that on a nutrition facts panel, when one is going to make a specific claim or benefit statement regarding the amount of protein in a food, that the protein quality via PDCAAS measurement needs to be considered. So there are two ways in which protein could be on a label. And in the bottom right-hand corner, you see the absolute amount of protein, and this is a label from milk, 8 grams of protein per serving. But you could also see the amount reflected in terms of its percent daily value. And the daily value is essentially, how much of a nutrient is needed to meet the nutritional needs for an individual. And again, it's based on a 2,000 calorie diet. That amount for protein is 50 grams a day. And this serving of milk, provides 16% of that daily value. Now what I'd like to do is to compare it to a plant-based alternative beverage that's on the market here in the US, a product from Silk. It's an almond and cashew beverage. You can see clearly on the front of pack, provides 10 grams of protein. So, again, on an absolute basis, you might look at that and compare these two products and say, oh, I'm looking for protein in my diet. I would benefit from consuming this product from Silk because it has more total protein than the dairy milk or cow's milk. And that's not the whole picture, because protein quality was not considered until you look at the nutritional facts panel, which is on the back of that product, where PDCAAS or protein quality needs to be considered. And you could see as you move across this table here from left to right, total protein content, 8 for milk in comparison to 10 for the Silk beverage. However, because it has a lower protein quality score, you could see it has a lower amount when it comes to the corrected protein content, and that's simply done by multiplying the PDCAAS score to the absolute protein content. And then you could see, while this plant beverage is providing more total protein, its corrected protein in terms of its percent daily value is actually less. So again, need to consider protein quality when you're looking at the total picture from a nutritional value standpoint. The other kind of practical or real-world application piece for protein quality is supporting muscle health. And when we think about muscle health, it's really as straightforward from a basic sense as really that maintenance of muscle tissue, muscle mass, and muscle function. And that's done by having a balance of the making of proteins, in the body, and is that being in balance with the breakdown of proteins in the body. And this is a continual process, right, where we're continually making and breaking down proteins over a 24-hour period in our day, and the rates of which are dependent on a variety of factors that you can see here indicated on the slide. And from a lifestyle perspective, there are two factors that really are within our control. And one is exercise. We know that exercise is anabolic in that it stimulates muscle growth or muscle protein synthesis. And we also know nutrition is the other lifestyle factor we can control that will significantly impact and regulate muscle protein synthesis. And from a nutrition perspective, total calories or total energy is important. But in addition, protein in the diet is also important. Now, when it comes to muscle health, it's certainly widely recognized from a sports and exercise perspective or even an aesthetics perspective, right? So there's a certain consumer set where this makes general intuitive sense. And, there are some that may try to downgrade the importance of muscle health for other populations. And really, nothing could be farther from the truth. So yes, while it's important in sport, physical activity, it's also critically important for all other life stages, right? As a child is developing, they need adequate amounts of high quality protein in the diet for normal tissue growth and development. And also the other end of the spectrum, as we age, and certainly as we get into middle age and older, muscle health plays a critical role in helping to influence our overall health. In addition, our overall functionality and just ability to do activities of daily living is typically called, right? So very practical skills as, carrying heavy bags of groceries from your car to your home, doing work in your house and in your yard. Think of yourself as an older adult, playing with your children and your grandchildren. If you don't have muscle health, you're not going to be able to do a lot of those activities that, not only are important for functional living, but also for our health and enjoyment and our mental health as well. Other benefits of muscle noted here: contributes to resting energy expenditure. That's important in terms of calorie burning and can play a role in weight management. It's a primary site of glucose disposal. And that's important when you think of its ability to have, significant or higher amounts of muscle and its ability to reduce risk for various metabolic diseases, whether it's metabolic syndrome, type 2 diabetes, or cardiovascular disease. So again, I really would like to help illustrate and dispel a bit of that myth that muscle is only important for young, active individuals. And really, it's a foundational factor supporting our health across our lifespan. Now, when it comes to thinking about, how much protein should one have in their daily diet? I had mentioned in previous slides that protein is a nutrient that's required by our body every day. So how much protein do we need? Well, many of you might be familiar, with the recommended dietary allowance. You could see here in the US, it's 0.8 grams per kilo body weight per day for adults. And, often in certain audiences, I see, the RDA really misinterpreted or misused when it comes to making recommendations for individuals. And some use it as kind of, really setting that requirement, getting someone's body weight, doing that calculation, and then saying, okay, that's the amount of protein you need to have every day. Now let me backfill the rest of your nutritional needs with a certain amount of carbohydrate and fat to meet your total energy needs. And in reality, the RDA really was established. If you go back and look at the literature that established the RDA, and I have an exact quote pulled here, it's an estimate of the minimum daily requirement, essentially, to meet the needs of 97 to 98% of healthy individuals. So again, it should really be viewed as a minimum from a requirement standpoint, and is certainly not set as an optimum level to optimize health. And a lot of the discussion in the protein science community over the past, 10, 15 years now or so, and moving forward into the future, is really looking at recommendations to move beyond meeting requirements to looking at amounts that might optimize health in specific population groups. In addition to the RDA, in the US, we have what's called the acceptable macronutrient distribution range, and that's based on a percent total energy in the diet. And this gives, practitioners, health professionals, a much larger window to play with when you're looking at what's a safe and acceptable range of protein that one could consume in their daily diet, that may not only meet requirements, but also might bring some benefits, again, depending on the population. Here, I'd like to show, what do these numbers translate into from a real world perspective. So again, based on a certain body weight and calories per day allowance, you can see the RDA only allows about 56 grams of protein per day. But again, I want to emphasize that that's a minimum requirement. That's not a maximum, because you could really see the difference in the wide range that's provided or allowed for when you look at the AMDR. Again, with the low end on a 2,000 calorie diet, 10%, 50 grams per day, up to the high end, 35% calories from protein, 175 grams per day. So again, while this ultimately needs to be individualized, this gives you an idea of the range that practitioners should feel comfortable working with. And overall, a body of science, of which I'm going to go into a bit more detail in subsequent slides, shows that higher protein intakes, still within the AMDR, but I would say leaning toward the higher end of this range, has shown and proven to be beneficial, not only for athletes and highly active adults, older adults to help mitigate the impact of muscle loss and function, clinical term being sarcopenia, and also those interested in weight management, not only from a satiety perspective, but again, maintenance of muscle perspective as part of a reduced calorie diet. That's going to bring about health benefits. Diving a bit deeper here, specific to sports and exercise, I've highlighted a recent position stand from the 3 health professional organizations noted on the lower left here. I mentioned these earlier: the Academy of Nutrition and Dietetics, Dietitians of Canada, and the American College of Sports Medicine. And they had updated their sports nutrition guidelines, or nutrition for athletic performance, in this 2016 publication. And similar to the previous publication, they suggest higher protein intakes for this population, right? So with this latest publication, they recommend anywhere from 1.2 to 2 grams of protein per kilo body weight per day. And you can see here, I've translated that for a 150-pound person to be somewhere between 82 to 136 grams of protein per day. But more specifically, what I want to highlight and what was new for this recent publication in 2016 is a nod to the importance of protein quality. And you can see here, not only protein quality, but the distribution of protein, having a plan for how that protein is evenly distributed across your 3 meal times, as well as following exercise. And what they recommend is 20 to 30 grams of, again, specifically calling out high quality proteins, that there is a difference. And also giving kind of a target of proteins that would provide approximately 10 grams of essential amino acids. And that's because ultimately the essential amino acids, as I highlighted previously, are what is needed in the diet to support protein synthesis, and specifically muscle protein synthesis. So there are a number of ways and different foods we can select to do that, but the most efficient way to do that is choosing high quality proteins that can provide, again, high percentages of essential amino acids. Similar theme I want to highlight here for the aging population. And, as we age, I alluded to it a bit previously, starting from about middle age, somewhere between 40 to 50 years of age, there's a gradual loss, not only in muscle mass, as well as muscle function. And if that becomes significant, it can be a considerable detriment to our health as we age and as we get into our 60s, 70s, and 80s. And, this slide highlights recommendations from 2 separate international scientific groups that were pulled together to look at the evidence to, make recommendations, practical recommendations from a protein perspective, and how one might be able to mitigate these losses in muscle mass and function. And again, similar to the theme on the previous slide, higher protein intakes in comparison to the RDA are going to be recommended. And you can see that range here from about 1 to 1.2 grams per kilo as a minimum for healthy older adults. And then depending on the health of the older adult that one might be working with, you could see it could be upwards of 2 grams of protein per kilo if there's severe illness or injury or marked malnutrition. And the other thing I want to call out again in this theme and in this discussion of protein quality, they're not only talking about quantity, they're talking about quality, and they're also talking about meal distribution. So 25 to 30 grams of protein per meal and 2.5 to 2.8 grams of leucine per meal. Now I mentioned leucine, as one of the, and probably one of the most critical of the essential amino acids, as it's been independently shown to kind of stimulate or initiate muscle protein synthesis. It turns on that machinery to get the process going. And again, it's going to be an indication of protein quality. So the next few slides, I hope to provide and discuss some really practical figures and tables that help us compare different protein sources in terms of their essential amino acid concentration on this slide, and then leucine concentration on my next slide. And again, we could see moving from left to right here on the screen, it's, a variety of plant-based proteins, and then in the shaded bars, animal-based proteins, and then you could see with the red circle, they're dairy proteins specifically. And you can see, whey protein essentially has the highest percentage in terms of the percentage of essential amino acids in relation to the total protein that it provides. 52% of the protein provided in whey protein is essential amino acids. And you can see how it compares to select other proteins going down the list there in the table. And what that means is, whey protein and then animal proteins, whey protein in comparison to all other proteins and dairy proteins, and then other animal proteins in comparison to plant-based proteins, they're just more efficient, right? They're going to be more efficient at delivering those essential amino acids that are needed to support muscle health and muscle function. So again, I gave a similar theoretical example on the PD-Cas slide, and I'm going to give a similar theoretical example here. So if we compare, pea protein to whey protein and in terms of its percent essential amino acid content, and you essentially need to eat 15% more pea protein to get the same amount of essential amino acids that are provided from whey protein. Very similar slide here, but just specific to leucine concentration. And the conclusions are essentially the same, right? Whey protein is also the highest or most concentrated source of leucine in comparison to all other protein sources that are available. And you could see, casein also having a high amount of leucine, and whey and casein are the two dairy proteins that are found in milk and other dairy foods, right? Then you look at animal proteins, and then again, you move down the list when it comes to plant proteins. And you can see the quote here from the authors, Stephen Van Villet and colleagues, who published this paper in 2015. The critical importance of leucine is now, not only is it just important as it's one of those essential amino acids, it's also on a molecular level really identified as an independent stimulator of protein synthesis. So again, going to be an indication of the quality of that protein, and there's practical targets provided from the literature that I've shown in previous slides. Now, the next point of discussion I want to mention is the question of protein blending. And given what I've talked about in terms of essential amino acids and protein quality scoring and leucine, something that often comes up, and it is a valid point of discussion when you're looking at this topic, is what if I blend a variety of plant proteins to match whether it's the total essential amino acids, the leucine content, and or the PD-Cas score to whey protein? Would I get similar health benefit? And this study in part address that question. So what you could see here, again, there were 3 different plant protein blends that were formulated. You could see the specifics in the table below. And they were compared to whey protein isolate. And you could see they were matched for leucine content, protein quality score, and essential amino acid content, right? So one thing I want to highlight here initially is that, similar to what I've illustrated or tried to highlight in previous slides, is that, you need less total whey protein isolate to provide the same amount of leucine and essential amino acids than you do in comparison to these plant-based proteins, whether they're provided individually or blends. Again, because whey is just such a more concentrated and efficient vehicle from which to deliver these important amino acids. And in any case, again, assuming that leucine is matched, some of these other things are matched, would you get similar effects in the body, health effects? And, what this study showed is that firstly, despite these things being matched, you look at blood essential amino acid concentrations, and what I'm showing here, whey protein isolate is highlighted. Whey protein isolate resulted in the highest blood concentration of essential amino acids in comparison to these blends. It also resulted in overall higher area under the curve. And what that means is, blood measures were taken, I believe, over a 4-hour period in this study. And that first graph shows the individual data points of that 4-hour time period. This bar graph just shows cumulatively over those 4 hours that a significantly higher amount of plasma essential amino acids was found in the whey group in comparison to the 3 blends. And those findings are summarized here, right? 30 to 40% total higher essential amino acid concentrations and 25 to 38 higher maximum leucine concentrations in whey protein in comparison to these blends. So, what that led the authors to hypothesize is that, there must be something else contributing to the inability of these plant proteins to match these plasma essential amino acid values. And again, I, note back to those potential differences in digestibility and bioavailability and the presence of anti-nutritional factors that could be playing a role. And even when you're going from a plant food to a more purified plant protein ingredient, which does to a degree reduce the amount of anti-nutritional factors, what this data at least shows is you may not be completely reducing them. Certainly more work needs to be done in this area. This was solely based on plasma amino acid values. It was not then based on a certain health benefit, certain measure of physiologic function. More work to be done, but that being said, I think it makes an interesting point for this discussion. Next, what I'd like to do in my remaining time I have with you today is to try to give a summation or overview of the studies that have specifically looked at this impact of protein quality on muscle health. What is the evidence? And there's a large body of science that's looked at the health benefits of dairy proteins on a variety of health outcomes, and even some science that's looked at some of the other alternatives to dairy proteins with health outcomes. Certainly, I would say the largest body of science is from dairy proteins, but there is evidence from other proteins as well. And given the time today, I would not be able to summarize all that work independently, right? But what I want to focus on here is when different proteins are compared one to the other, and we're really looking at, is the quality of the protein impacting the health outcome? There is some evidence that I think generally shows, the value of dairy proteins in this context. So the first study I want to show here is what's been shown both in young adults and later been shown in older adults, that whey protein promotes greater muscle protein synthesis in compared to soy protein after resistance exercise. And again, here the data is in young adults, and you can see it compared equal amounts of whey, casein, or soy. The amount of protein was matched to provide 10 grams of essential amino acids. and whey protein resulted in higher protein synthesis, muscle protein synthesis, specifically after an exercise bout in young men. These next two graphs I want to show are really reinforcing some of the points that I made previously, is that, part of the mechanism as to why this is the case is higher blood essential amino acid levels. You can see the whey protein here in comparison to the soy and casein resulted in higher blood essential amino acid levels, and also higher blood leucine levels. And again, as I noted, these are going to be things which are important in driving muscle protein metabolism. So, how about, if these, acute effects, short-term effects on muscle protein synthesis, do they have long-term effects on muscle mass with training? There's been a handful of studies that have done. Here I'm highlighting one. And one of the reasons I'm highlighting it, it's probably one of the longest training studies done. It's a 9-month resistance training program. It was also pretty tightly controlled, using untrained men and women, mid-20s or so in terms of their age, providing about 20 grams of matched whey protein or soy protein or calorie-matched carbohydrate. And what you can see here is that over the course of those 9 months, the whey protein group gained significantly more muscle here, 3.3 kilograms, in compared to both the carbohydrate group and the soy group. And what I want to show you, similar to the theme that I showed on some previous slides, when you look at the post-supplemental provision of whey protein, soy, or carbohydrate, and at the beginning of the training program, which is indicated as pre-training, and at the end of the 9-month training program, post-training, you can see that regardless of training status of the subjects, the whey protein resulted in the highest plasma leucine levels. Again, so despite total protein being matched in the whey and soy groups, and I think, some subtle differences in leucine concentration, a bit more in whey, it's translating to higher amounts in the blood, and that's then gonna, translate to higher uptake or a greater amount of uptake of that leucine by the muscle to have anabolic or muscle building benefits. Here, I just want to highlight a few references that you can go look on your own if you're interested. Similar positive results for whey and milk in comparison to soy have been demonstrated in other studies with resistance exercise, and that's both with old and younger adults. Next, I want to highlight its importance from a weight management perspective. I alluded to this previously in regards to the role of protein and higher protein diets in satiety, but also it could have an importance in muscle health. And what we've seen in the literature is, generally speaking, higher protein diets support the preservation of muscle as part of a reduced calorie diet. And that's going to be important for all the issues and facts that I mentioned previously. One, being its contribute to resting energy expenditure and general functionality of the individual. And what hadn't been shown prior to this study being published in 2015 is that might there be an implication of protein quality as part of that higher protein diet in terms of its ability to maintain muscle on a reduced energy diet. And so this study used overweight and obese men and women, approximately middle-aged. They put them on a 14-day calorie restricted weight loss diet, right? So that's going to cause some weight loss. They took, 2 times a day, they took about 27 grams of whey protein or soy protein and compared to calorie matched carbohydrate. And they measured muscle protein synthesis. Now, 14 days isn't long enough to see significant differences, certainly between protein source on weight loss. And that was not the primary outcome of the study. The primary outcome of the study was how these 2 different proteins might impact muscle protein metabolism. And what was shown and summarized here in the results is that, yes, energy restriction or a weight reduction diet is going to negatively impact protein metabolism. It's going to reduce protein synthesis, and that's inevitable. But what the study also showed is that whey protein, in comparison to soy protein, was more effective at minimizing the reduction in protein synthesis that was noted. So that's valuable. And what that likely is going to be able to do over an extended period of time is going to help to preserve muscle. It's going to help to reduce the negative impacts of a reduced calorie diet on muscle loss. And that, in the big picture, should help to facilitate weight management. The last study I want to highlight here is from a more clinical nutrition perspective and really how it relates in the bigger picture of muscle loss and muscle function with aging and that public health issue of sarcopenia. And one thing we know is that, as we get to middle-aged and older, the frequency with which middle-aged and older adults are admitted to hospitals increases. And that could be for a variety of conditions. And what's been documented in the literature is that even short-term stays in a hospital in both middle-aged and older adults, it results in significant reductions in muscle mass and muscle function. And I want to attribute this, visual that I'm going to describe here to Dr. Doug Patton-Jones, who I've heard speak many times. He's a prominent researcher in this area, and he's done a lot of work in this area and gives the really impactful visual that within a 5 to 7 day period, even middle-aged and older adults can lose about 1 kilogram of muscle mass just in that 5 to 7 days. And when you think about that visually, think about, purchasing, a 2 pounds worth of steak and how big that is. And that essentially is the amount of muscle that a middle-aged and older adult is going to lose from their body due to the inadequate nutrition from a total energy and protein standpoint that they typically undergo when they're acutely hospitalized. And that doesn't necessarily mean that they are not always provided with appropriate food. It's that their appetite is reduced. They're not focusing on eating. When they do eat, they're kind of eating some comfort foods like sweets and desserts. They're not focused on high quality protein, and that's going to have negative effects. And what this study did and demonstrated is a really practical and I would say relatively easy, feasible way that whey protein can be included in the diets of this population. And modest amounts, I think it was around 10 to 15 grams at breakfast, lunch, and dinner, and had significant benefits. So a little bit more details here. You can see 20 healthy older adults between 60 to 80 years of age. They underwent 7 days of bed rest followed by a 5-day rehabilitation period. You can see information on the diets here to the right in the table. Total protein intakes were generally matched, although actually the whey protein group ended up having slightly less protein both during the bed rest as well as the 5-day rehabilitation period. Also want to note the quality of both of these diets was generally good. The mixed diet had about 68% of the protein coming from animal, about 32% coming from plant. I would generally say that's a pretty good and recommended distribution. The whey protein group modified that slightly, right? So in order to keep overall protein matched, they took some sources of protein away and they added back, as I mentioned, about 10 to 15 grams of whey protein into the diet. So really manageable, simply stirred it into one of the drinks that they were having with their meal. And what did they find? Well, as expected, bed rest resulted in a decrease in muscle mass, both whole body and leg lean mass, as well as muscle strength in both groups, right? You're not going to completely eliminate the negative impact of bed rest. But what we did see, or these researchers, what they did see was that the whey supplemented group was able to partially protect leg lean mass in comparison to the mixed diet. So there was a benefit, right? There was a blunting of that negative effect. And that certainly is going to be a favorable outcome. In addition, the whey protein group also lost more fat mass than the mixed diet group during bed rest. And again, that's important because, that change in body composition, a loss of muscle, a subsequent, or concurrent gain of body fat, that's going to have negative implications on your overall health. And lastly, and maybe most importantly, following the 5-day rehabilitation period, the whey protein group experienced a full recovery of muscle strength, right? Full recovery of muscle function, while that decrement in strength or muscle function persisted in the mixed group. And when it comes to, muscle mass and muscle function, both are components of sarcopenia, but what more and more literature is showing is that muscle function, that strength, that functional capacity, that ability to perform activities of daily living, that is what's going to be most critical when it comes to protecting and preserving the health of older adults. And here, simple strategy by which whey protein helps to facilitate benefits in those areas. Lastly, I do want to acknowledge the fact that, there are studies that have illustrated that, when you feed higher amounts of lower quality protein, you can get similar benefits, right? So, ultimately it does come down to what's going to efficiently deliver optimal amounts of those essential amino acids and leucine. So here, I want to highlight some of these. Whey protein or rice protein provided after resistance training resulted in similar improvements in body composition and exercise performance. But, that's with 48 grams. We know, and you might remember from previous slides, I noted, recommendations from position papers have shown somewhere between 20 to 30 grams of high quality protein is really all that's needed to maximize muscle protein synthesis. So what this study simply did was really overfeed, in my opinion, overfeed protein in order to provide the same amount of essential amino acids and leucine and account for those differences in digestibility and bioavailability in the rice protein, so that they were able to get, a similar amount, which, likely could have been achieved in a lower amount of whey protein. And for the sake of time, I won't go through each of these additional bullets, but similar theme here when you looked at casein and compared to wheat protein hydrolysate, and then you look at mycoprotein in comparison to milk protein. Again, whether they're equivalent or whether in the last one, mycoprotein was seeing higher amounts of muscle protein synthesis, but that's because they're providing more of it. So ultimately, when matched gram for gram and you're looking to optimize it from a lowest total amount standpoint, it's hard to really compare to the value that dairy protein brings. And why is this important? And really, I think it's certainly a global public health issue, the issue of overweight and obesity, the prevalence of overweight and obesity throughout the population. Certainly, we've seen that for many years in adults. And unfortunately, that's really been trending downwards in terms of, I don't mean downwards in rate, I mean, downwards on an age scale to, teenagers and even preteens when it comes to rates of overweight and obesity. And that looks at, overconsumption of energy. And if you're going to say, if you're going to consume lower quality proteins, just eat a little bit more of them. Well, those proteins also come with calories, and making recommendations to have additional calories, in my opinion, might be irresponsible depending on the population, because again, as a population globally, we could probably all afford to reduce our energy intakes to reduce rates of obesity. And here's a review paper from Dr. Bob Wolf, who's one of the preeminent scientists in this area of protein nutrition, and he adequately points out the essential amino acid to calorie ratio for high protein foods must also be considered when comparing protein foods, right? High quality proteins such as milk proteins enable essential amino acid requirements to be met with less total calorie intake compared to lower quality proteins. And you can see that clearly illustrated, for the ingredients, whey compared to soy. And then you look at whole foods, right? Whether it's beef, milk, eggs, chickpeas, or some of these other plant-based proteins. Here's, a different way, a different table that I constructed that's really illustrating a similar point. So if you recall, position stands for older adults. Two that I mentioned that are published and cited here, they aim or suggest for aiming for about 2.5 to 2.8 grams, 2.5 to about 3 grams of leucine per meal to maximize the muscle protein synthesis response. And, there's a variety of ways in which an individual can choose to achieve that leucine intake. And here, just wanted to compare, looking at different ingredients as well as different foods, And if the goal is to achieve 2.5 grams of leucine, what serving size would be needed to achieve that, and how many calories would be provided in those serving sizes. And again, drastic differences when you look at whey protein isolate delivers that in 100 calories. Soy protein isolate, 170 calories. And then you get down into the different foods. And certainly, there's, once you look at, oatmeal, peanut butter, bread, I mean, the amount of calories, again, if you were going to try to achieve these essential amino acid and leucine amounts in particular in this slide are going to be, it's calorie prohibitive. It's not going to be something you're going to want to rely on to get your overall protein intake. So, it's not to say we shouldn't be consuming plant-based foods as well as animal-based foods, but, I like to say, they could complement each other in terms of the value they bring in the diet. And certainly there's an importance of plant-based foods when it comes to certain vitamins and minerals that they provide, fibers that they provide. But when it comes to protein, it's hard to match the efficiency with which animal foods deliver high quality protein. And then I would say really at the top of the list is the dairy proteins. So in summary, a couple slides to highlight key takeaways. And the first part of the presentation was really looking at dairy foods as that entire package, right? What's the value proposition of the package of dairy foods? And I think it's unique, and the science shows that they provide a powerful and unique nutrient-rich package that's hard to match. Whether it's contributing significant amounts of essential nutrients to people's diets, it's essential for growth and development of young children. Dairy foods collectively, regardless of fat content, right, encompassing the range from whole fat to fat-free products, either has a neutral or beneficial association when it comes to reduced risk for certain non-communicable diseases. And the benefits as part of a healthy, balanced dietary pattern are recognized by leading health organizations, as well as their inclusion in a majority of food-based dietary guidelines across the world. And when it comes to, protein specifically, really want to drive home that all proteins are not created equal. And dairy proteins are amongst the highest quality proteins available that we can have in our daily diet. And that's due to whether it's their superior amino acid composition and or their higher digestibility and bioavailability, right? And what does that mean in the context of the real world? Well, for one, it relates to the ability of a protein to support muscle protein synthesis. And, I like to laymanize that, to muscle health. And, the efficiency with which dairy proteins can do that, I think are essentially unmatched based on what we've seen in the literature. And, that has particular applications for a variety of populations, right? Sports nutrition, weight management, and healthy aging. And the data available, really supports dairy proteins, and primarily the work's been done with whey protein, and the work that has compared whey protein to soy protein or some of the other proteins, whether it be collagen or plant-based proteins. It's really superior when it comes to stimulating muscle protein synthesis. Yes, need to acknowledge the fact that these differences in protein quality can be accounted for by consuming a greater amount of lower quality protein. Have to acknowledge that when you look at the totality of the literature. But, as I posed in some of the slides I illustrated, what are the implications of consuming these additional calories? And should that be a recommendation that health professionals and scientists are comfortable with when we look at the rates of obesity that are prevalent around the world? And lastly, while I didn't have time to discuss it here today, I think it's something to consider from a sustainability standpoint, right? If we want to and feel comfortable acknowledging based on the data that one needs to consume a higher amount of plant proteins to match the nutritional value from dairy proteins or other higher quality proteins, not only do we need to consume more, and that has implications for energy intake, we need to produce more of these foods. And that has implications from a sustainability standpoint. And certainly, in today's environment, and certainly as we move toward the future, we cannot talk about nutrition without talking about sustainability and the health of the planet, and needing to always look at how can we efficiently produce foods and in a way in which is responsible, reduces environmental impact, and is healthy for the planet in doing so. And dairy has a very strong story to tell from a sustainability perspective as well. So thanks for your time today. Really hope you enjoyed the presentation, and please continue to follow us for more relevant information on the role of dairy proteins in health. Thank you.
Thank you, Matt, for sharing your valuable insights. Today's dairy ingredient nutrition overview showcases the truly unique nutrient package provided by U.S. dairy ingredients, especially dairy proteins, which offer benefits across all life stages. All proteins are not created equal, and no other type of protein ingredient offers the range of specific and quantifiable benefits offered by nutritious, minimally processed, mild-flavored U.S. dairy proteins. We're also very proud of our sustainability story, which is a cycle that starts with the U.S. dairy farmers' commitment to unparalleled care and management of their cows to reduce the carbon footprint. The United States is one of the largest milk producers in the world, with the average U.S. cow producing 4 times more milk than the average global cow. This greater per-cow productivity results in the U.S. having the smallest greenhouse gas emissions per unit of milk produced compared to other regions in the world. Have you ever wondered about how protein ingredients are processed and what minimally processed really means? In 2020, a landscape survey was conducted by RTI Innovation Advisors and funded by the National Dairy Council, with the objective of surveying commercial production of 17 different food protein ingredients to shed light on how they are processed from end to end. The study focused on the processing steps between post-harvest of the raw material through to production of the dry protein powder. Commercial processing of mainstream and emerging protein ingredients involves a variety of processing steps and techniques that vary based on source material, method, and end product produced. In general, higher protein or purer ingredients, such as isolates, require more processing steps to remove non-protein components. One advantage of dairy protein processing is that the starting raw material, milk, is already in liquid form, so it doesn't need to be hydrated to start separating its components. In addition, processing of plant proteins may require the use of processing aids beyond simply water, such as solvents, salts, acids, caustic agents, and bases. With few exceptions, processing of dairy ingredients require only water. And going beyond dairy proteins, other dairy ingredients also result from simple processes. For example, milk powders are produced by removing water from liquid milk using evaporation and drying. Permeate is produced by filtration based on particle size, and sweet whey powder comes from drying the whey that is produced during fermentation to produce cheese. During protein isolation and purification, which are required for all types of proteins, non-protein co-products are produced, which must either be utilized or disposed of. Co-products of dairy protein processing tend to find more value-added uses than those of plant proteins. Several examples of dairy protein co-products are permeate and lactose. In closing, I'd like to mention a USDEC resource entitled A New Era for Protein: Why U.S. Dairy Delivers in the Crowded Protein Marketplace. This free report can be found at thinkusadairy.org, and it details a comparison of protein ingredients from different sources based on their functionality and sensory attributes. USDEC and the U.S. dairy industry are your innovation partners, and our offices around the world are ready to assist you in a variety of ways, such as providing formulation and application ideas, technical support, and identifying dairy ingredient suppliers to meet your specific needs. Thank you very much for participating in our webinar today. We hope you found it useful.
Olá, pessoal, de volta aqui. Espero que tenham recebendo.
Well, considering the questions that we have received, I believe you found it very interesting.
Como muita gente da apresentação e também
Well, many of you are asking about the recording and the PowerPoint presentation. So don't worry, we will certainly share that with you. I'd like to thank Terry and Matt for the presentation, very interesting presentations. Now let's start with the Q&A. So we do have a good mix of questions we received through the chat and also some that we received already during registration. So let me start with a question from Eliana. Matt, is there any specific recommendation regarding daily protein intake for individuals in the Army? So just to update you, well, Matt is listening to the interpretation, so that's why he did not answer right away. So Matt, can you please answer the question? Did you get it?
Sure, yes. And thank you for your question. There is some Army or military specific research that's been published. It comes from, I know in the US Army Research Institute of Environmental Medicine. Generally speaking, I would say you could look at military populations similar to athlete populations. So the recommendations that were listed in the position stand in one of the slides that I showed for athletes and active adults, where they recommended higher protein intakes. I believe the range was 1.2 to 2 grams of protein per kilo body weight per day. I would say those generally would be applicable to military populations or Army populations. Now, within a military population, I realize there could be a bit of a spectrum within that. I know, in the US, and having worked in this population in a previous role, you have those on the spectrum that really are like athlete type, right? So they are very fit. They're expending a lot of energy through the exercises that they do. And again, that higher protein intake would be required, similar to what I recommended in athletes. And if they're actually in situations where they are not meeting their energy needs or total calorie needs in the diet, we see this often in certain military populations that are out doing missions in the field, then perhaps that protein intake should even be a bit higher to help preserve that muscle mass. So it could be, say 2.5 grams of protein per kilo body weight. Conversely, you have overweight individuals at times that could make up military personnel. And I would still kind of stay in the higher end of the range, say 1.5 grams of protein per kilo body weight to help support from a weight management standpoint. So I think, the recommendations would be very similar to what I've outlined here in the presentation.
Ok, muito obrigada, Matt.
Thank you very much, Matt. We have another question from Carla.
Mais em relação aos estudos que
Her
foram
question is related to studies you mentioned,
específicos para a proteína do
and she
soro.
says they are very specific for whey protein. But the question is, can we compare or relate what you presented to cow's milk, which is just pasteurized milk or UHT that you find at the market? Is there any type of comparison when you think about cow's milk and not necessarily the protein itself?
Yes. So thank you for your question. I focused on the research with protein ingredients. However, there has been research, as you're suggesting, with just comparing milk to specifically soy beverage. One of the slides that I included did have a few references for those studies. So hopefully once you get the slide deck, you can see, but generally fluid milk, general milk that you would purchase in your grocery store. It's been shown with short-term studies looking at muscle protein synthesis, as well as longer-term studies with exercise training, similar to what we see with the ingredient-based work, has been shown with the fluid milk. So you would have greater rates of muscle protein synthesis, and it also resulted in better training adaptation over time, meaning greater muscle gain and actually enhanced fat loss. And really it's because, the dairy protein ingredients are derived from fluid milk, which is the base product. So the quality of the protein in fluid milk is very similar. The main difference would be that the ingredients are just a more concentrated form of that protein, but the quality itself would be similar. And I think if you're looking to compare whole foods, the same conclusions could be made, whether that protein is found in milk, whether that protein is found in cheese, whether that protein is found in yogurt, again, our core products. The main difference just would be the amount of protein you get per serving size. So if you're concerned about calories, the most efficient way is through an ingredient form. If you're looking at whole foods, the protein quality in the dairy would be similar. You just might be getting some additional calories, whether it's from the fat or carbohydrate that's in the whole food, as well as some greater amounts of vitamins and minerals that are in the whole food, depending on what protein ingredient you compare it to.
Ok, obrigada. Temos várias perguntas.
Thank you very much. We do have many questions, Matt. Well, one from our registration process. I don't have the name of the person, but it says, I've heard that protein-rich diets may have a negative impact on health, particularly on kidney and bone health. Can you please comment on that?
Sure, very good question. And certainly it is a common question or common theme that I see not only when I speak with health professionals on the topic of protein in the diet, but also general consumer. And from my perspective, and I would say this echoes the perspective of leading protein scientists that work in this area, is that when we're talking about healthy individuals, regardless of age, if you're talking about healthy individuals, the amount of protein that I've referred to in this presentation, whether it's the amounts per kilogram of body weight, or you may recall the acceptable macronutrient distribution range, which provided the amount of protein per percent energy from 10 to 35% total calories. The amount of protein in these ranges is safe and will not negatively impact kidney function, okay? If you're dealing with clinical populations that do have hampered or lower kidney function, then yes, that is a completely separate discussion, and they do need to limit their protein intake. But when you're talking about healthy populations, there is no concern with kidney function. Now, in terms of bone health, you may recall I actually mentioned that in addition to calcium, adequate protein intake is actually beneficial for bone health. So really, the current data is actually completely opposite from what the misperception might be in terms of higher protein intakes would be negative to bone. We know that, certainly adequate protein intakes are positive to bone, and that, that older data that showed increased calcium excretion in the urine with higher protein intakes, that's been subsequently shown to not have a negative impact because your actual calcium absorption from what you get in the diet and how you absorb it into your body is enhanced when you're having higher protein intake. So your body regulates and makes up for that. So again, despite these misperceptions, there really is no negative impact of higher protein intakes within the ranges that I've discussed.
Ok, muito obrigada.
Thank you so much, Matt, for your comprehensive answer. We have another question from Denise. Well, her question is the following. Is there any benefit when you think about body metabolism, when you combine dairy plus plant-based vegetables, let's say peas, vis-a-vis the intake of just one of these two types, so just dairy or just plant-based protein. So is there any benefit when you combine these two? Terry, if you want to also answer this question.
Why don't you step back, because it relates to the blending issue that you discussed.
Sure. So yes, very good question. From a purely protein perspective and looking at the primary role of supporting muscle metabolism, I do not necessarily see a benefit of the blending. There is not a unique role that a plant protein would provide that dairy doesn't provide. Because again, ultimately, when we're thinking about the primary role of delivering the essential amino acid, all foods are a vehicle for those essential amino acids, and some foods are just a more efficient way to deliver that. That being said, if your company is in a position and they find that there's a consumer segment that is interested in kind of blending, plant and animal, dairy and plant-based foods, because there's a perceived benefit from a nutritional perspective, I would say the value is that higher quality dairy proteins can offset a lower protein quality score, so that the blending of the two actually enhances the overall protein quality score. The other thing I'll say is from a total diet perspective, again, as I believe I mentioned, whole foods, both animal and plant, bring unique nutrient contributions. So when I'm looking beyond protein and I'm looking at whole foods, certainly fruits and vegetables bring a unique vitamin and mineral profile and fiber that should be part of our daily diet. So I don't want to provide a misperception that we shouldn't be consuming those foods. We should. I don't necessarily see a unique advantage of plant protein ingredient from a protein nutrition perspective.
Perfeito, muito obrigada.
Perfect, thank you. One more question from the registration process. Is there any difference when you think about the health benefits provided by whey protein concentrate compared to the isolated and hydrolyzed products? Would there be one that's best for muscle health?
Is it clear?
Yes, thank you. This is a common question I get frequently because of the different choices and portfolio of dairy proteins that you mentioned that are on the market. From a purely nutrition perspective, I would say there's two primary differences, generally speaking. One is that, an isolate is just more concentrated than the concentrate, right? A whey protein isolate is about 90 to 92% protein by weight. A whey protein concentrate, whey protein concentrate 80 as an example, is generally 80% protein by weight. So if in certain applications you want to have less total amount of powder being used to deliver a maximum amount of protein, the isolate would be preferred. The other nutritional point of difference, I would say, is isolates have, related to that higher protein concentration, there are certain elements that are lower in concentration, one being lactose. So I know there is a consumer segment that may have some concern of lactose, a reduced ability to digest or tolerate lactose. In those populations, whey protein isolate would provide an advantage because it's about 0.5 to 1% content of lactose by weight. When you compare that to whey protein concentrate, that's whey protein concentrate 80, I should specify, that's about 4 to 8% lactose by weight. So again, for consumer segments that are looking for lower lactose or very close to, can't technically say lactose free, but again, very low in lactose, the isolate would likely be a better fit. Now, there's also slightly less fat in the isolate as well. percentages are similar to what I mentioned for lactose. So about 0.5 to 1% fat in the isolate, 4 to 8% fat by weight in the concentrates. And then, lastly, and perhaps Terry could comment a bit, there are benefits of choosing concentrates versus isolates, or maybe even hydrolysates, when you're talking about a formulation or application perspective from a food science, right? Whether you're using a clear beverage as the end application versus a bar, there would be recommendations as to which ingredient you would want to use.
Right, certainly from, what we're talking about here in this webinar is daily nutrition, but there are many other aspects to consider regarding whey proteins, and one of the most important ones is functionality.
Terry,
Depending
I'm
on-
sorry to interrupt. We cannot hear you well. Could you please change the channel?
Is that
of
any better?
interpretation? Yeah, I think so.
A little bit better? Okay.
Yeah, better.
I'll get closer to my mic. So for this webinar, we were mainly talking about nutrition, of course, but there are many other aspects to consider when deciding what kind of a protein to choose for your formulation. And key is going to be protein functionality. And depending on the type of product that you're making, the pH, overall formula, whether it's let's say a clear beverage versus some other type of product, it's going to be really important to consider the functionality. So we're talking about things like water holding capacity.
I'm sorry to interrupt. It's still not good. I'm so sorry.
Any
Again.
better?
Yeah, much better.
Oh, okay.
Let's try again.
Okay, should I start that again?
No, I think that you can just keep
Continue,
going
okay.
from where you
Okay, so we're talking about water holding capacity, heat stability, viscosity, emulsion stability, dilation, foaming.
Closer.
So if you're making bakery, baked products, for example, foaming may be very important. And so you're going to want to factor those aspects in when you're deciding what type of protein ingredient to choose. So nutrition is one element, functionality, flavor, and then of course the sustainability piece that we touched on. Those are all points to consider when deciding what type of protein ingredient to choose. And there's lots of information on our website, which is noted here on the slide, thinkusadairy.org. And if you have specific questions related to your project and the type of product that you're formulating, just reach out to Carolina and her team, and we will gladly give you individual help.
Obrigada. Desculpa pela interrupção.
Thank you, Série, and I apologize for interrupting you. Well, unfortunately, we are running out of time, so our last question, and then we close. But once again, I'd like just to underscore the fact that we will send you the PowerPoint presentations and also a link for you to watch the video, and please count on our team to support you. Well, next question then, final question. How
Tendências como a dieta vegetariana e as pessoas que precisam consumir produtos sem lactose. Como proceder com
the vegetarian diet and
para as
people who
pessoas que
cannot
têm
eat
intolerância à
lactose?
lactose?
What about
então, acho que
dairy
uma grande
ingredients for
oportunidade
those with lactose intolerance? So I think it's a great opportunity for you to share, Matt, how the industry is addressing these issues. Thank you.
Sure, yes. So a couple of different points there. Again, I think, there was a bit of a breakup on the audio, but I think the main question was the lactose intolerance question again, right? And how dairy is addressing that from a dietary perspective. So
exactly.
Yes, a couple points I'll make there. One, from an ingredient perspective, as I mentioned previously, I think looking for products that feature whey protein isolate would provide the, very, very low amounts of lactose. So that I would feel fairly confident of having, no issues for folks that cannot tolerate lactose consuming whey protein isolate, because It's 0.5 to 1% lactose by weight. The other thing I'll mention is, if you're looking at dairy foods as an example, there are lactose-free milks that are on the market. Certainly, I know in the US, I cannot speak as knowledgeable about the Brazilian market, but I would say in general, there should be a growing amount of lactose-free products on the market because the industry recognizes this consumer segment that is looking for these products. Beyond lactose-free milk, I would say yogurt, also because of the bacteria, the organisms that are used to ferment milk, make it become yogurt, actually breaks down the lactose in milk, in the yogurt. So most people that have lactose tolerance issues should feel very comfortable consuming yogurts as well as same with various hard cheeses, would be very low in lactose. So in general, I think there are many options for folks that have a lactose tolerance issue. And the other thing we know nutritionally is there's a wide spectrum of what individuals can tolerate. So you start with small amounts and then you scale up from there because there is a lot amount of individual variability. Some people may able to have a larger serving size of lactose and be fine. Some are a bit more sensitive. So in addition to just solely searching for lactose-free products, you can have small amounts of other dairy products and see what your tolerability is.
Can I add to that, Carolina?
Sure.
So I just want to really emphasize the importance of what Matt is saying here, because a lot of times people think that when they can't consume lactose, that means that they can't consume dairy, and that's not the case. If you switch to plant-based plant proteins, you won't have the lactose, but you're also going to be missing the nutrition and all of the points that Matt talked about. So it's really important to weigh the pros and cons, and recognizing that if you're removing dairy from your diet to get rid of lactose, you're also going to be removing a lot of the other benefits as well. So look for the lactose-free dairy products, and then you'll still have the benefits of the protein nutrition and the other things that we talked about here today. So it's about making educated decisions, right?
And one point I'd like to finalize and build on from Terry that I thought of that I did not mention is that outside of the removal of lactose, there is no difference in the nutritional value of regular milk, say, in comparison to lactose-free milk. So all the other nutritional benefits will be exactly the same. So if there is a misperception that lactose-free products are changed or modified in some way that also might compromise some of the other nutritional benefits, that is not the case. They would be nutritionally equivalent, with the one exception of the removal, or depending on how the product is made, the breakdown of lactose, so that people can consume it without concern.
Super claro. Muito obrigada.
Very clear. Thank you so much, Terry. Thank you so much, Matthew. But unfortunately, we have to end this webinar. Questions that have not been answered live will be answered by email. I'd like to share the emails of our speakers and also of our office here in South America. So please feel free to send us your questions or requests for any other types of material. And do visit
Tem muito material traduzido para português, tá?
www.thinkusadairy.org. We do have many documents that have already been translated, but if you have any other questions, just reach out and we will certainly help you. We can also support you, introducing you to potential suppliers, so do get in touch with us. And I'd like to kindly ask you to please answer our survey, just as we did before. So if you can kindly please answer this last poll question. So how do you assess this webinar? So excellent, very good, good, fair, and poor. So, and we do hope that next year we can see you all in person. But that's it. So I'll give you 3 more seconds to answer this poll. Thank you so much. So I'm sharing now the results. We're very happy that you found this webinar useful to you. And I'd like just to say that Clarice, my colleague here, she has also shared the link for you to access the materials in our chat. And once again, please do reach out. We are available to support you. So now I'd like to turn it over to Terry and Matt for their final remarks. So Matthew, thank you so much for your presentation. It was really a brilliant presentation. So up to you now.
Yes, thank you. Thank you, Carolina. And thank you, all the attendees for your time this morning. I'm happy to learn that you enjoyed the presentation. And just to, again, reiterate that please consider, USDEC and the staff, both in Brazil as well as in the US, as a resource for ongoing questions or support as you look to innovate with dairy ingredients. Thank you.
Muito obrigada. Terry?
Thank you. Now, Terry.
Yeah, I agree with Matt's comments. Thank you so much, everyone, for joining. And we really appreciate the opportunity to deliver this information to you. We know that there are a lot of webinars for you to choose from, so thank you for choosing ours. And I hope to be able to travel to Brazil in 2021 if we're able to travel again, and look forward to meeting many of you in person. Thanks.
Muito obrigada. Também agradecer a toda a equipe.
Thank you so much. I'd like to thank a River Global team, not only in Brazil, but also in the US. I'd like to thank Clarice Nagata. Once again, thank you all for joining us. Thank you for joining us in previous webinars, and see you next time, next year. Have a great day. Bye-bye.